Yeah, am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear.
With the permission, Excellencies, can we begin?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yes, Namaskar. And yes, Namaskar and good evening to all joining us today from New Delhi and different parts of India, and some from the West Asian region too. I am Manish Dabhade here, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of the Indian Futures. I take this moment to welcome you all today on behalf of the Indian Futures. I cannot but begin by hoping that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Let me at the outset, for the benefit of the excellencies who have joined us
You're breaking.
introduce the Indian Futures very briefly. Yeah, can you hear, sir?
Yeah, now better.
Now better.
Yeah, I hope this is clear now. Let's mention that we are a New Delhi-based independent organization that started out in 2016 with the sole aim of creating a global platform to plainly and dispassionately discuss in what is the truest ancient Indian tradition of Samvad, a dialogue, the ideas of New India in all their varied dimensions and contestations. We are extremely proud to have recently hosted some of India's finest minds from the world of government, politics, academia, diplomacy, and culture. We have had cabinet ministers, former chief minister from Maharashtra. We have had Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, who is the president of Indian Council of Cultural Relations, many BJP general secretaries of the ruling party, Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, who is the chairman now of the National Security Advisory Board, Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, who was recently retired as the Foreign Secretary of India, Professor Raja Mohan, top academic, Dr. Yamini Iyer, Center for Policy Research President, and I'm mentioning just a few. I'm especially delighted that we are joined today as associate partners by Millennial India International Chambers of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, and embassies of Israel and the UAE. It is my sheer delight and honor to introduce the Plenary Diplomats Roundtable, Dr. Ron Malka, His Excellency Ambassador of Israel to India. Thanks, sir, for joining us today. He completed his MBA in Finance and Business Administration in '94 and PhD in Economics in 2004. Between '83 and 2007, he was in the military service, from where he retired with the rank of full colonel. During this time, he served 9 years in the IDF Intelligence Corporation and for 16 years held managerial positions in the Chief of Staff's Financial Advisory Unit. From 2008 to 16, he was senior lecturer on banking, economics, and capital markets. And from 2016 to 18, he served as the Dean of School of Financial Markets and Banking at the Academic Center of Law and Business. Ambassador Malka provided financial advice and guidance to companies and institutions in the Israeli market and international companies in public and private projects. In addition, he served as economic advisor to the Prime Minister's Commission to review the defense budget. Very importantly, Dr. Malka served as a director from 2008 to 14 and acting chairman in the board of directors of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. In addition, he was member of the Finance and Budget Committee in the exchange between 2009 and 14. His Excellency, Your Excellency, it's really truly a very, very, great privilege to have you with us today evening. take this opportunity to also welcome Dr. Albanna, His Excellency Ambassador of UAE to India. He is now obviously the the UAE's ambassador in New Delhi from January 2016. Earlier was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as the Director of African Affairs, and also as a director in the Department of Economic Affairs from Feb 2013 to 2014. Both excellencies really bring solid, diverse experiences to the table, and I'm sure each one of us are going to really benefit from their address today at the roundtable. We are also joined as the chair for today's roundtable by Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. He has been the member of the Indian Foreign Service, served in the Indian missions of, importantly, Bangladesh, USA, Russia, Libya, and Jordan. In the Ministry of External Affairs, he worked in the economic West Asia and North Africa and consular divisions. Also as the director, joint secretary for the Gulf and Hajj divisions. Ambassador Trigunayat worked as the deputy chief of mission in the rank of ambassador in the Embassy of India, Moscow, prior to his retirement in May 2016. He was also ambassador to Jordan and Libya and high commissioner to Malta. Obviously, every one of us know that currently he and actively contributing articles and media commentaries on topical issues. He is steering a committee on promotion of trade and investment with Africa and very importantly the Middle East at the FICCI. He's also the honorary advisor to BRICS Chamber of Commerce as well as a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. Thank you, all three of you. This is a fantastic, session we could have dreamt of. It's really a very, and as I repeat myself, that it's really a deep privilege to have each one of you join us. We are joined, in fact, on Zoom, and we're also live streaming now on YouTube, where many faculty, students, politicians of different hues are joining and very eagerly looking forward to your addresses. With this, now I hand the floor to Ambassador Trigunayat for his remarks as the chair. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Dabade. The Excellencies, my dear friends, ambassadors, and distinguished participants at this Diplomats Roundtable. I'm so grateful to both Excellencies for taking the time to come and join and share their thoughts with us today, because so much has happened in the region. I would like to say that this webinar has been going on since morning, and it is part of a book project, which is India and West Asia, the Modi years. And therefore, since morning, we have been sharing thoughts on various aspects by various experts, professors, think tank representatives. And this has been an enlightening experience. But nothing beats the practicing diplomats and their worldview, especially as the relationship between India and Israel and India and UAE and Israel has gone through a very different kind of strategic maneuvering over the years, and we have turned into great friends. Now, but the fact remains that the West Asia, which is our extended neighborhood, is strategic and extremely important for India. Bilaterally, our relations with every country, especially in the Gulf and Israel, have never been better. In my assessment, for Prime Minister Modi's government, his West Asia policy has been a resounding success story. Relationship has moved from being transactional to strategic to symbiotic. New areas of cooperation have been identified, especially as we move towards AI-driven Industrial Revolution 4.0. Developments in the region have a direct impact on India's well-being and crucial interests. Hence, regional stability and peace are absolutely essential and desirable. It is also a fact that the region has a disproportionately large number of conflict zones and hotspots, and the ongoing rivalries between and among the regional actors have the capability of dragging down the economies and polities, especially as the COVID-19 challenge has decimated the strength of the economies in the region and the world. However, most of the regional countries have coped up rather well. But the recovery will bring about several new changes and challenges as the international geopolitical, economic, and dynamic changes take place And the new actors with newer aspirations are trying to dislodge the old powers from their leadership position. We are not sure which way Biden administration will go, as retracting from the region and focusing on the Indo-Pacific will be a strategic priority given the Sino-US competition. And we are all part of that whole gamut of the relationship. Fortunately, we are meeting today when we will see finally a proper transition in the United States take place when Joe Biden takes over tomorrow morning. So Russia and Turkey have also got their own game plans in the region. So I would also like to say that whatever way we might look at Trump's tumultuous 4 years, he did catch up in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords have been his singular major foreign policy achievement. Peace and security are indivisible. Among all the countries, I would rate our relationship with both Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv as qualitatively superior, given the extensive engagement and expense of collaborative projects, which is further compounded and substantiated by the very personal, close relationship between our leaders. Hence, the Abraham Accords have also opened new vistas of cooperation, especially trilateral ones or quadrilaterals, where we can work together in high-tech, healthcare, energy, and food security, to name a few. India has continued its high-level engagement with our partners in the region during and despite the pandemic. As we talk, the Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs, Shri Muralidharan, is in the UAE today. He actually spoke to us from Abu Dhabi this morning. During the visit, he will be meeting the UAE dignitaries and a broad cross-section of the Indian community. And we are indeed grateful to mainly our Gulf partners for hosting the Indian community so well, despite the problems and the situation that they themselves face. There is a special focus on the welfare of the Indian workers. We have worked together in consultation with the leaders all through the pandemic, be it in bilaterally or under G20 or in the GCC domain. We are very happy to see the outcomes of the resolution of the GCC conflict at the Alula summit. And we see that there is going to be back to normal security and development paradigm among all the countries who are our close partners. We appreciate the increasing support from our friends in countering terrorism and confronting those using cross-border terrorism as an instrument of foreign policy. COVID and economy are other biggest challenges, and we have to work together to overcome those. Last month, Prime Minister Modi spoke to Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim. Dr. Jaishankar visited Bahrain, UAE, and Doha recently. For the first time, the Indian Army Chief visited Saudi Arabia and UAE. So the relationship has grown in different areas and is continuing to grow, whether it is energy, trade, investment, food processing, whatever areas. We have also had virtual consultations with nearly every leader. And so now the new areas of cooperation are coming through, and as new challenges come around. So therefore, we have to work more together in this. Today, as US transition eventually takes place and had impacted the West Asian region in diverse ways, and only the posterity will tell its impacts. But we are fortunate today to have two most dynamic ambassadors, Ambassador of Israel, Dr. Malka, and Dr. Albanna, the ambassador of the UAE, who have been driving this bilateral relationship with India on and have brought it much more closer. And therefore, we will need to understand from them exactly how do they decipher the newer dimensions of our collaboration, as well as especially in the way the developments in the region are taking place, because they are equally important for us. So I won't go into that much, but I would love to listen to the two ambassadors. Thank you once again. Manish.
Yeah, may I now invite Ambassador Ron Malka to deliver his address. Over to you, sir. Please.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Professor Dabade, for your kind introduction. My colleague, Dr. Albanna, Ambassador Trigunayat, distinguished guests, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this special event. Yes, it's always a pleasure for me to talk about the thriving relations between Israel and India, and how much it's becoming even more and more important as much as things are developing in our region and the close neighborhood, the distant neighborhood. And of course, developments like the peace agreement that you just signed with the UAE and other Gulf countries, which is really bringing us very good news to the region, and I think for the whole world. Since I think there is nothing better than the pandemic to teach us and give us the lesson of the importance of collaboration and working together, uniting and just facing challenges when each and every one of us brings his comparative advantage and its added value to the table. Think of just what was mentioned now, the peace agreement with UAE that we are so blessing and so proud and happy and welcoming. Think that from the eyes of the perspective of India, both Israel and UAE are key strategic partners of India. This is the definition of His Excellency Dr. Jaishankar, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So if two key strategic partners of India are forging ties, becoming closer, collaborating, cooperating, supporting each other, think of how much added value it can bring, of course, both to Israel and UAE, but also to India, and how much this trilateral collaboration can bring so much value for supporting each other, making each and every one of us more independent, which is very, very important. I said, nothing like the pandemic has taught us better how much important it is to be united, but also self-reliant. And this is exactly what we bring to the table. So, for example, what happened just under the pandemic between Israel and India is a shining example of how countries and nations should work together. We managed to conduct a very complicated joint research on rapid tests for COVID-19. We managed to bring an Israeli delegation, expert scientist delegation to India under the pandemic, and within 9 days to take 25,000 samples. This is a very big and complex operation. It could not have happened if there was not such a trust and respect between our both scientists, delegations that plan together, work together, joint research together. And of course, what is more important than that is the fact that they knew each other, they worked before. So we need to see how we can support and urge more and more collaboration on day-to-day basis, on continuous basis. So if challenge comes, we are ready for that. So now many processes they are even now more accelerated. The Indo-Israel Agriculture Mutual Project, which is the best agriculture project that we have with any country in the world. We have tens of them with many, many countries. The most successful one is the one that we have with India. Just now that we are talking, 29 active centers of excellence all over India. There are more 9 that are now underway, and within the coming year will be full activating. And within those centers of excellence, we managed to train 1.5 lakh Indian farmers in a year with the latest technologies, experience that we have, that we can bring in agrotech and water management, which is very, very important. We are going to nominate for the first time to designate a water expert that will be in our embassy in Delhi. He will join the agriculture expert that was already there for many years, just to advance our collaboration on food security and water security. In Israel, it's a holistic approach. So many new initiatives that we have in all sectors, sharing technologies, innovation. And just lately, 2 months ago in Gujarat, I went there and we signed an MOU on innovation between Israel and India. In the same place that was inaugurated 2 years before by our 2 prime ministers, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu in Gujarat. It's called iCreate. In healthcare, We have so much to collaborate. Now our scientists this time working together, sharing their experience, their know-how, and joint research on different aspects, of course, of COVID-19, but not only in this. And our role is to see that it keeps going. And of course, many other initiatives that are there. And Israel is going to be present in more places around India. Just lately, a month ago, I don't know if you know, but I nominated an honorary consul for the Northeast, based in Assam. So I myself visited 3 times the Northeast. We are working with Assam, with Meghalaya, with Tripura, with Mizoram on new initiatives, and Israel is going to be present there much more than it was before. Just before the pandemic, we signed an agreement between Israel and India on aviation, civil aviation. So now Israeli airlines can get to any destination in India. So just before the pandemic, we opened new airlines, one to Goa and one to Kochi, direct flights from Israel to India. And now we are exploring to open more destinations. Bangalore, Guwahati are destinations that are looking for. So by advancing the connectivity, more and more initiatives will come because the potential is there. What is mostly important to know about the relations between Israel and India, and later between Israel and UAE and UAE and India, is that not only that we don't compete each other, we complete each other. Think of the vision of His Excellency Prime Minister Modi of making India, Israel, a small country, fully employed, coming the startup nation as we call, like UAE, focusing on innovation and technology, coming to India, forging ties and advancing the production, upscaling, mass scaling in India. So we complete each other, not only for India, but also for out of India to export, because it's very, very important for India in order to become a $5 trillion economy. It will become a $5 trillion economy to advance its exports. We want to be part of this endeavor. Think of the vision of Atma Bharat. We want to be part of India becoming more self-reliant. So we bring our technology, our advanced development, our experience, working together on all sectors, on different kinds of technologies, what we call dual use of technologies or multi-use of technologies, working together to make each and every one of us more self-reliant, independent, which is very, very important. We need to support each other in that. So we complete India, bring our relative advantage, our added value, and together it's I would say, a positive sum game. This is what we call synergy. So much we can support and help each other. And I think what is the exciting, thriving relations between Israel and India, I see now becoming between Israel and UAE. So many Israelis, friends of mine, have already been to UAE, to Dubai, and to Abu Dhabi, visited there, starting forging ties and advancing business and collaboration in technology and many aspects and things that we can bring together and work together, support and share with each other. So I think these developments, as Ambassador Trigunayat says, are very important. I would say very exciting, bringing good news to the region. And our role as public servants is to advance it, to support, to facilitate, and to open new paths, forge new formulas for our business sectors and of course the government sectors to work together on all levels. So it's government to government, business to business, people to people. Once we build the bridges and support and prepare the ground to be more fertile, things will happen. So that's what we do between Israel and India. Open new paths, new avenues, new formulas of collaboration, and create, I would say, the right structure of incentives in order to attract those players that you want them to come. And once they come, once we feel this spark, we just leave it, the rest follows. So it happens in many, many areas, of course, between Israel and India, and hopefully between Israel and UAE, and then the way for a trilateral collaboration is very, very immediate. And I'm sure we are going to see that happening in the coming days, weeks, months. I think after the pandemic, things will look different, and I think in the more positive aspect. So I think what is happening now in the region, especially between Israel and the Gulf countries, between Israel and India, the Gulf countries and India, is very promising, bringing good news. And I think not only for the region, but for the world. We always say that now seeing India as an emerging power, global power, is good news for the world, because India brings a lot of positivity. India brings more added value, I would say, to the equilibrium, the global equilibrium. So we want to see India thriving, getting stronger and stronger. I think it's good news for the world, and we want to be part of this endeavor. And that's how we attract more and more Israelis to work together. I can tell you, for example, that just nowadays we started negotiations on a bilateral investment agreement. Some investment agreement between Israel and India that will attract investors from Israel to come to India and to invest in real economy, not in papers, in real economy, because that's what India needs. The cumulative savings in India doesn't support all the needs of the investment in India. The potential is huge. So we want to attract Israeli investors, so we're working on that. Again, building the structure of incentives that will attract, will give them the confidence that we need, the support that we need, bridge the risk as much as we need just to make them come, and then to see more and more collaboration and joint ventures that are thriving, because now I'd say there's a scarcity of resources. So we want to attract more resources to come, and this really related to the structure that we will bring. So we are working on that, trying different formulas. Eventually we'll find the best one that will be optimal and will attract those that we want them to see. So, and these are only just, attached just, the links that the starts of many, many initiatives that are there between our countries. We are working now on education. I think that education, since both Israel and India give so much importance to education, we are now opening new avenues, and again, attracting more scholars, more students to come and just to exchange between Israel and India, to share their know-how, their experience, not only the know-how, but also the practices, the way of doing things, of searching, of advancing, of adapting to the new time, new technologies, a new environment. So we built Israel on education. When we started 72 years ago, there was nothing there, no resources, no natural resources, nothing. Jews came from all over the world with almost nothing. They left all their assets behind. So we invested in human capital, in education, that later evolved to innovation and healthcare. So we invested in human capital. And I know that also India gives so much importance to education. So again, education is something that we are going to see now thriving and growing between our two nations. And I myself, as was mentioned before, come with this background. So I'm going to do as much as I can just to support this process that is already ongoing between Israel and India. Of course, there are many, many other avenues. You mentioned security and counterterrorism and cybersecurity. As much as we become more smart and adopt smart systems and digitizing all the economy, we become more vulnerable to cyber attacks. So again, Israel is one of the leading countries in this aspect, and so many things that we can share, work together, and see how we can support each other, which is very, very important. And of course, culture. I will conclude by that, by talking about culture. So when two peoples have so much affection and so much chemistry, I don't know if you've been there in a room where the Israelis and Indians together, you can feel the joy. There's a lot of chemistry. The most touristed country for Israel is in the world is India. They come to India not just as the backpackers for a few days. They stay, they just want to live here. They feel so comfortable. I asked them, those youngsters, what is it that attracts you so much to India? not all the time they can put it in words, but they feel the chemistry. The chemistry is there. So in that case, we want to advance the cultures, to understand, to experience that we will experience the culture of each other. And this really brings their hearts even more closer. So just lately was opened an Indian culture house in Tel Aviv. We are now working on a co-production of Bollywood with Israeli artists. And of course, we are bringing, not now under the pandemic, but many bands and artists from Israel are coming to India. Indian artists are going to Israel, and I think there's so much joy and collaboration also in this area. So this is just in a few words. I can talk about it, a lot and a lot, but just to give you the sense of how things are thriving. And just to conclude with that under the pandemic, Israel and India has become even more closer, better friends, and the way that we collaborated under the pandemic will shape the way that we are going to collaborate in the future, and it looks very bright and promising, very bright and promising. And in that opportunity, I also need to thank again India for the help and the support that we got, just evacuating thousands of Israelis from all over India under the full lockdown and closed skies, and all of them got back very fast to Israel safe. And this is thanks to the Indian authorities that were there to support and to help us. And of course, when India needed, we brought respirators, the best advanced medical equipment that we developed in Israel to fight COVID-19. We brought here, we shared with Ames Hospital and with other hospitals here in India, and of course the joint research that we did together. So this is how countries should collaborate, support each other. This is what our friendship values are. And as I said, the future looks very bright in the respects of Israel and India, and I think also Israel and UAE, and Israel, India, and UAE. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those very optimistic remarks. As we in India deeply value this increasing partnership with Israel, you brilliantly outlined the path-breaking arenas of cooperation between India and Israel, and very importantly talked about the building of synergies, and very importantly talked about specific areas, technology, different sectors. And again, rightly mentioning that it is really about a positive sum game. I mean, that's very important point you raised. And also, I really see this transformation happening in what you rightly said, not just G2G, not just government to government, but also business to business relations, people to people relations. I think that's very important. And again, here, I would really say the credit really goes to the top leadership in respective countries. From this side, it was Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think they really put in their personal stamp, a personal imprimatur of sorts for building and taking these ties. Again, very importantly, as I was mentioning in today's, my presentation was on India-Israel relations. So it was really came brilliantly and superbly in the joint statements of both 2017 and 2018 January, identifying really a roadmap for the future, coupled with many agreements which were signed during those very important bilateral visits. As PM Netanyahu talked in the Raisina dialogue, that it was really an alliance of democracies. I think that's a very important, ideational roadmap which we all need to keep in mind. And really hats off to really, and I would end here by saying that the sheer enterprising and the entrepreneurial spirit of Israel, surrounded in a very volatile neighborhood, I think really inspires men in India. So thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Dr. Ron Malka, for really sharing your ideas about the present state of relationship and really its future trajectory. It's deeply, an honor to have you with us. With this, I now request and invite Dr. Albanna, who is the UAE ambassador to India, to give his address today. Over to you, Ambassador. So please unmute yourself.
Thing happened. Yes. Am I okay now?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Great,
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Well, my colleague, Ambassador Ron Malka, my friend, Ambassador Anil, Trigunayat, colleagues, first of all, it's a great pleasure to join you all this evening. I begin first by thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of this virtual interaction, the Diplomats Roundtable. The topic itself, when we look at it, the topic that you have chosen, India and West Asia, the Modi years, suggests that the Honorable Prime Minister Modi, Narendra Modi, attaches the highest importance to India's relationship with West Asia countries. I presented my credentials as ambassador to the UAE to the Honorable President of India in January 2016. It was immediately after the first visit of the Honorable Prime Minister Modi in August 2015, which I had the pleasure to accompany him as a designated UAE ambassador at that time when he was on his official visit to the United Arab Emirates. Today, when I am completing my 5 years of service as a UAE ambassador to India, I have had the honor to experience the bilateral ties between UAE and India escalate to never seen before, to a point of a strategic level. In January 2017, India and the United Arab Emirates signed a strategic agreement. And that was the first strategic agreement that UAE had signed ever. Our overall relationship are upgraded to a comprehensive relationship on all sectors. I could name so many sectors, but the most important ones when we talk about financial, IT, health, education, renewable energy, energy in different formats, aerospace, so many sectors, food security, the transport and logistic. Those are the main sectors that we have had big, huge growth between the United Arab Emirates and India. The high-profile visit in these years have renewed and revitalized the India's outreach towards West Asia. Prime Minister Modi has made multiple trips to the region, including 3 visits to the United Arab Emirates and 2 visits to Saudi Arabia, as well as first ever visit to Bahrain, and of course, many visits to the state of Israel. UAE was the first Gulf country where Prime Minister Modi visited in August 2015, as I mentioned, making the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the UAE after a gap of 34 years. This visit was followed by 2 visits of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Deputy Chief Commander of the UAE Armed Forces. The first visit was in February 2016, and the second visit was in January 2017, where he was the chief guest in India's Republic Day celebrations. In 2019, during Prime Minister Modi's 3rd visit to the UAE, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the United Arab Emirates Armed Forces, awarded Prime Minister Narendra Modi the UAE highest civilian award, the Order of Zayed Medal. Many important agreements and MOUs have been signed, as I mentioned, in many different sectors between UAE and India, and concentrated on, as I mentioned, trade, investment, infrastructure, energy, defense, space, technology, and the final one, which was the most important agreement that I mentioned earlier, the strategic agreement, which was signed in January 2017. India is an important country for us. India is our trading partner number 2. Total trade between, foreign trade between India and UAE. In 1985, it was about $185 million in 1985. Today, the figures are reaching over $60 billion, the foreign trade. India is an important country in terms of having common goals, values, and a sense of shared history. Our two countries have developed a deeper appreciation for each other as a multicultural and multi-ethnic society, and important members of the global and regional community. In the crucial times of COVID-19, our relationship even became and come stronger. Our highest leadership engaged with each other numbers of times during the pandemic, and there has been close coordination between our leadership, between the Honorable Prime Minister Modi and His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, several phone calls between Minister of External Affairs, Dr. Jay Shankar, with our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, and on many other different levels, ministerial or any other levels. The past month have showed us exceptional cooperation between our two nations in all priority sectors. And of course, health superseded that sector, or these sectors, I should say. Due to the pandemic, there was a lot of collaboration in the health sector between the United Arab Emirates and India. And I should thank the Indian government and the Indian authorities for supporting and allowing Indian medical crews to fly from India to UAE to support the overall medical authorities and medical institutes in the United Arab Emirates. I shall aim to highlight a few rare aspects of the exemplary strategic partnership UAE shares with India. I talked about the commercial ties. I talked about India being the partner number 2 to UAE, but I forgot to mention that UAE is partner number 3 to India, and that is after United States of America, China, and then third, United Arab Emirates. That by itself tells us the story. In terms of investments, the UAE is the 11th largest investor in India. It is also the largest Arab investor in the country, accounting for about 85% of total Arab investments. So 85% of total Arab investments in India comes from the United Arab Emirates. UAE cumulative investment in India, it amounts to about more than 40 billion or $46 billion. These figures can actually tell us a lot of things again. As you all know, the largest fund in the UAE, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, have created with the Ministry of Finance under the NIIF, a fund of about $65 billion dedicated for infrastructural projects in India. Energy security, that's another important aspect. And Middle East region has over the years emerged as India's leading partner of choice for securing its energy need. As per the figures available, India meets 83% of its oil need through imports and is the world's third largest oil consumer. From total imports, India imports about 60 to 65% from its energy need from the United Arab Emirates, or from the Middle East, mainly from the United Arab Emirates. Even during the current global COVID crisis, the UAE and Saudi Arabia were the preferred partners of choice for the Indian government to fill the strategic oil caverns of India. In the past 2 years, UAE and India energy relationship shaped to a strategic relationship. UAE, for the first time, offered India companies 10% concession in the lower Zakum field during the Prime Minister visit to the UAE in 2018. A bilateral energy cooperation framework agreement was signed by India Oil Company and ADNOC and Saudi Arabia Aramco as a trilateral project in development of the big, huge refinery in Ratnagiri of a total value of about $44 billion. The UAE, of course, also set up a strategic reserve oil in India, and that was one of the main agreements that UAE ADNOC has signed with India Oil Company. I talked about the economics, I talked about the importance of the strategic, the political relationship, but I need to touch on one thing very important also, and that's where the UAE believes in so much, and that was one of our reasons where we finalized and came into an agreement with Israel and signed the Abraham Accord, and that is people to people. It's very important. We signed an agreement with Israel. Yes, we need for things to move, yes. But before that, we need to have the understanding and the interaction of people to people. There has been a long time of boycott, of not understanding, not knowing, not having the full culture and the full understanding. We need to have that time in order to grasp the people to people feeling, and then a lot of things, I'm sure, will roll. The manpower cooperation is yet another aspect that we look at and we have with India. We have more than 3.4 million Indians live in the UAE, the largest diaspora in the United Arab Emirates. And I should also say and admit that those people played an important aspect and role in the big, huge development that took place in the United Arab Emirates. So therefore, we're thankful to all of them, of all categories, from doctors to engineers to all levels, we are thankful for. During the early difficult months of COVID-19 outbreak, special flights have been organized, and we have reached to what we call air bubble agreement. Of course, there was the normal standard bilateral air service agreement, but due to the total lockdown and closing of all the airports, there was a need for that to remain. So therefore, the UAE was one of the countries, one of the very first countries that signed an air bubble agreement with India. And by the way, no flights ever stopped from United Arab Emirates to India and from India to United Arab Emirates. The passengers flights that used to fly, of course, there was a total lockdown, so therefore there were no passengers, but there were cargo, big, huge cargo movement on those passenger flights. So during the total lockdown and the severeness of the pandemic, still the air connection was there between the United Arab Emirates and India. Another important aspect is food security. The UAE looks at India as a committed partner when it comes to food security. In the financial year 2019 and 2020, UAE was India's #1 export destination for fresh fruit, as well as fresh vegetables, as well as pulses, and second largest for dairy products, third largest for non-basmati rice, and fourth largest export destination for basmati rice and Indian tea. UAE is also one of the top exporting nations for Indian meat, cereal, sugar, wheat, and processed food items and pulses. The UAE and India have been working closely together to form a joint food corridor. And we're working very, very closely with the Indian authorities to set up what we call food parks and food corridors between the United Arab Emirates and India. During the pandemic, medical diplomacy, an interesting aspect of our strategic ties, has emerged. As my colleague, Ambassador Malka mentioned, that yes, during the pandemic, the relationship even got stronger between Israel and UAE. And I would emphasize on that also. And I will assure that the relationship got even stronger between UAE and India during the pandemic. In May 2nd, 2020, a plane was sent from the UAE carrying 10 tons of medical supplies to India to boost the country's effort to curb the spread of COVID-19. India provided, meanwhile, big, huge quantities at the very beginning of the pandemic of consignment of hydrochloroquine and hydroxychloroquine to the United Arab Emirates. As we all know, these two medicines. It is not for COVID-19, but it was used at certain time to strengthen the immunity of the medical people, doctors and nurses and all that, by taking hydroxychloroquine and hydrochloroquine to protect themselves from the COVID-19. So we had a big import of that from India to UAE. UAE and India jointly facilitated also the return of medics and healthcare professionals, as I mentioned earlier, to strengthen the UAE battle against the pandemic. UAE-India cooperation is in high technology, IT, defense, space, cybersecurity. Those were all ongoing even during the pandemic. In conclusion, my colleagues, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I would say some recent positive development shows that we are achieving peace in GCC and the Arab region. It will advance regional peace, stability, and creating new energy for united and stronger Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, and the Arab region, and the Middle East region, and the West Asia region. It opens a closer people-to-people relation. I talked about that people-to-people touch and relationship, and I gave the example between UAE and India, and recently between UAE and Israel. It opens closer, the relation should have that people-to-people relationship, culture, knowing the culture, and as you all know, tolerance and acceptance is one of the main categories and one of the main pillars in the United Arab Emirates. Tolerance, acceptance, and UAE was the very first country to create a special ministry and a special minister dedicated to tolerance and acceptance. Finally, we count India as a valuable and important partner for the region. I was reading, and I share with you this, I was reading a very important report, actually it's top confidential, that was issued in the United States. In 2018, there was a report, 2019, there was a report talking about the importance of India as a country and the importance of India to the United States in terms of the region and in terms of the collaboration. And the Indian report says that India will be one of the strongest power, not in this region, but all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues, ambassadors, I thank you very much and wish you all the best, and looking forward for many, many similar sessions like this. And I congratulate the organizers for organizing this session, and my greatest thanks and gratitudes to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. This was really a brilliant address, really giving a very broad sweep, a very comprehensive picture of India-UAE ties, and again, bonds of strategic nature, economics, political. Also, very importantly, you pointed out the diaspora. And again, very rightly pointing out that it was actually the seeds were really laid, led in a major way in the strategic partnership agreement of 2017. And obviously, the UAE's highest civilian award to Prime Minister Modi stands testimony to the initiatives taken by both the governments to really forge close partnerships. And again, you rightly ended with a very, and I think that is really the key takeaway from your address, that UAE stands for tolerance, for acceptance, and I think that is the bond which India shares with countries and states like the UAE. Without further ado, I'll now request Ambassador Trigunayat to give very briefly his chair's remarks, concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Manish. Your Excellencies, if I may, I would like to say that this was one of the most fascinating discourse on the bilateral relationship, most comprehensive one by both of you. The relationship with both UAE and Israel is the anchor of our relationship in West Asia and the Gulf region. I must say that your particular contribution, personal contributions to this is also amazing. And what you have already outlined, like in the case of Israel, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has said eye for eye, Israel for India, or India for Israel. I mean, that's what shows the kind of comprehensive strategic partnership that we have. Likewise, with the UAE, our relationship has not only been strategic on paper, as has been mentioned by Ambassador Albanna, that it has achieved tremendous gains despite the pandemic and before. In fact, I would like to say that in the area of counterterrorism, in the area of the repatriation of the offenders in UAE, you have done an amazing job. And I have personally been very much involved, and in fact, on 4th February, I'll be joining the World Tourism Summit online, and I've been part of it as a peace ambassador, that the UAE is showing that humanity is more important, tolerance is more important. And I think you as a leader, as a middle power in the region, you are showing the path, and that should be followed by many more countries, so that the religion becomes an asset for everyone and not a dividing factor. And I hope that the region, with India's help, will continue to progress, and jointly we will conquer not many difficulties that we are going to face in the future, and work towards peace, stability, and security, because that is extremely important for all of us. And that is the message that needs to be conveyed to some who do not wish to understand in that manner. So, but I think we'll have to continue our efforts so that there is a positive trajectory. It might be not a very realistic assessment in terms of real politics, but this is what the diplomats do. They hanker for peace, they work for peace, and they want to achieve peace by any means. Thank you once again. I'm so grateful to you for accepting our invitation today to share your thoughts on the bilateral relationship and the trilateral and the regional dynamic that has been emerging. Thank you once again. Wish you all the very best and wish you good health. Thank you, Manish.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat. With this, I now invite Dr. Kushnam, who's the convener of this conference, to really present a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Kushnam.
Thank you, Manish. Namaste and very good evening to all. His Excellency Dr. Ron Malka, Ambassador of Israel to India. His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Abdul Rahman Albanna, Ambassador of UAE to India. Thank you for taking out time for participating in the session and giving thoughtful presentation and comments and positive trends of India with your countries. To ensure it is surely ensuring a better orientation and the focused direction to our project, India and West Asia, the Modi years. I would like to once again endorse the remark of His Excellency Dr. Albanna, who said that India is not only the regional power, will be the power in the world. That is the very crux of our project. And at the same time, we want to ensure that India will be a benign power with capacity. With this, now I thank all the chairs, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, sir, Professor Grajesh Pant, Professor Kumaraswamy for their valuable presentation, discussions and experience inputs and comments, which will surely be a valuable inputs for all the authors and to ensure a better direction to the project. All the session has been stimulatingly very enlightening and enriching, a valuable experience asset to make our project more effective. I also thank all the author presenters of all the session and all the participants on Zoom and YouTube. With this now, I also would like to thank on behalf of all the team here, our associate partner of the conference, Millennial India International Commerce, Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, Embassy of Israel and Embassy of UAE. With this word, I think the entire international conference of the authors has been a very successful one, and it has ensured a very befitting context, and our project will ensure more shared synergy between India and the West Asia, and the project will ensure that down the line, India and West Asia becoming the best partnership for the shared future of security, stability, and prosperity. Thank you everybody. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Excellencies, for joining us. Great to have you. It's an honor. Looking forward to meeting you in person very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
All the best. Thank you.